Right now, as you're listening to this, the most advanced telescopes on Earth are quietly staring at something they can't explain. Late last night, the European Space Agency's data servers went offline for 11 minutes, long enough for a set of files to vanish, only to reappear in a restricted NASA channel marked Preliminary Imaging C2725N1, 3i Atlas. Within hours, those same files began circulating through encrypted astronomy forums. They were grainy at first, jittering pixels, overexposed frames, but once enhanced, the images revealed something that sent a ripple through every observatory in the network. The object isn't reflecting sunlight anymore. It's emitting light from within, soft, structured, rhythmic. And the source of that light seems to be arranged in geometric lines, like circuitry. Hit that like button, subscribe and ring the bell if you want to keep up with this cosmic mystery, because what you're about to see won't just alter our view of comets, it may alter our view of ourselves. By morning, astronomers had two choices: pretend it was a data artifact, or admit what they were seeing defied every known natural model. Officially, the images haven't been released. Unofficially, thousands of scientists have seen them, and what they show changes everything we thought we knew about this interstellar visitor. Stay with me tonight as we unpack what the new official 3i Atlas images actually reveal, and why they've left even NASA unsure whether we're witnessing physics or something far beyond it. The first images came from the Hera Observatory Array, a combined optical and infrared array used primarily for asteroid spectroscopy. When the data stream resumed after a 3-hour blackout, the object appeared different. No longer a diffuse glow, but a solid angular form. The most striking frame came from the shortwave infrared channel, a clear lattice pattern repeating at intervals of exactly 0.72 seconds. That repetition was too precise for natural outgassing or thermal oscillation. It was rhythmic, deliberate. NASA analysts called it temporal coherence, a polite phrase for something behaving intelligently. And the colour profile of that glow didn't match reflected sunlight or thermal emission. It was peaking in the near ultraviolet range, consistent with controlled plasma, something our technology barely understands, let alone attributes to a drifting interstellar rock. Still, the agency's public statement was brief. Spectral data under review, no evidence of artificial activity, but inside the emails told a different story. Several correspondences referenced a non-random phase alignment in the light curves, meaning the pulses weren't chaotic. They followed an equation, and that equation repeated across multiple frames, as though the object was broadcasting the same instruction over and over. It's not the first time light from deep space has tricked us into imagining intelligence, but this time the geometry doesn't lie. Under digital magnification, each emission node lines up into a hexagonal array, like the surface of a manufactured lattice. Imagine a honeycomb pattern carved into the skin of a comet, but glowing from the inside out. If this was simple solar heating, it would fade as the object rotated. It didn't. The pattern held, synchronized perfectly to its 29-hour rotational period. The same mysterious timing we've seen since its first detection. Even more curious is the surrounding halo. Infrared scans show faint material orbiting the object, debris perhaps, but arranged in an equatorial ring exactly 400 kilometers wide. That ring shouldn't exist. At 3i Atlas's current velocity, any loose fragments would have dispersed long ago. Something is holding them in place. Electromagnetic containment, gravitational resonance. Whatever the answer, the effect is precise. Too precise for coincidence. By now, both NASA and ESA have shifted to what internal memos call Level 3 spectral silence. That's the classification used when an anomaly cannot be dismissed but also cannot be publicly explained. It's the same label once applied to the so-called WOW signal, and later, the unexplained repeating bursts from deep interstellar space. But this time, the signal isn't coming from somewhere out there. It's coming from an object moving right through our solar system. Astronomer Dr. Lena Moravec described the images in a late-night briefing that was never meant to go public. She said, "It's not just glowing, it's modulating. The light is being shaped, not emitted." When pressed on what she meant, she hesitated. We're not observing a natural process. We're observing behaviour. That word, behaviour, is now being quietly debated in conference calls across agencies. Because if the pattern is real, it implies intention. And if it implies intention, then 3i Atlas isn't a passive traveller, It's doing something. The most plausible hypothesis suggests a natural crystalline core under immense internal pressure, creating piezoelectric discharge along structured fault lines. That could theoretically explain rhythmic luminescence. But there's one problem. No known crystal lattice can survive the interstellar temperatures and radiation exposure 3I Atlas has endured, yet it's intact, coherent, pulsing, and, according to some, responding. Because after those images leaked, something changed. Deep space radio arrays tuned to 1420 MHz, the hydrogen line, picked up a subtle modulation matching the object's light frequency. It was faint, buried in noise, but repeating. Not random, not thermal, but patterned. 3 pulses, pause, 5 pulses, pause, repeating in an unbroken cycle, and in between those cycles a secondary whisper, lower, like a hum. When spectrograph analysts slowed it down, the pattern mapped perfectly to the pulse intervals captured in the leaked images. Light and radio speaking the same rhythm. No official explanation exists. Every agency memo ends the same way, pending further verification. But in private, astronomers are calling it what it feels like: communication. And here's the part that unsettled even the skeptics. In the latest image, time-stamped October 12, 2025, the central glow flared once, brighter than ever, and then dimmed into silence. Since that moment, no telescope on Earth has captured another pulse. It's as if the object went dark on purpose, right after we saw too much. When the light from 3I Atlas stopped, NASA's servers didn't. Every automated telescope, every spaceborne lens, kept capturing data that no longer made sense. Frames filled not with darkness, but with absence. It wasn't black, it was negative, as if the object had folded inward and left behind the shape of where it used to be. Inside the Prometheus archive, a secure subnet that shouldn't have been online, analysts found packets of raw telemetry marked secondary refraction. The data looked meaningless until someone reversed the waveform. That's when the images reappeared, only they weren't optical anymore. They were cross-sectional, like medical scans of something alive. Within the layers of 3I Atlas was an architecture no one could explain. Nested chambers, perfectly symmetrical, connected by narrow filaments that glowed for microseconds at repeating intervals. Each filament pulsed along a path that, when mapped, drew a lattice identical to magnetic field lines of a living cell. The object wasn't inert rock, it was organized. The pattern repeated 31 times, always at the same spacing until the final chamber, an empty core, spherical, smooth, radiating faint sub-infrared warmth. Temperature, 212 degrees C. Not hot enough to glow, yet the sensors read persistent internal heat. A pulse, constant as a heartbeat. NASA's internal memo, classified, later leaked, described the readings as localized thermodynamic inversion. Translation, energy without source. No fusion, no fission, just steady release. Dr. Kane, head of the Spectral Geometry Division, wrote one sentence that's still circulating among researchers. If it's not alive, it's imitating life perfectly. By dawn, the entire Prometheus network had gone into silent sync. That's the protocol for an event exceeding containment priority. Only 3 times in history has it been triggered, once during the Oumuamua incident, once during the Martian Echo anomaly, and now. Every external feed, web, telescope, data relay, began returning identical placeholders, grey noise wrapped around the phrase, data under spectral embargo. But independent astronomers had already mirrored the files. Dozens of hobby observatories in Chile, Australia and Japan compared timestamps and realized something extraordinary. The gaps in official data aligned exactly with the moments Earth rotated directly beneath the object's trajectory. Each blackout lasted 29 minutes, the same number that defines its pulse cycle. The conclusion was uncomfortable. The blackouts weren't censorship, they were synchronization. The object was using Earth's magnetic shadow to hide its next emission burst. At 0412 UTC, the ESA's Helios 9 probe, positioned between Mars and Jupiter, captured a reflection invisible to ground-based optics. A faint halo expanding from 3I Atlas like a bubble. Spectral analysis showed the halo wasn't matter, it was refracted space. A thin distortion bending starlight around the object, identical to gravitational lensing but far too small to be gravitational. For 40 seconds, the bubble expanded until its radius matched exactly the orbit of the probe itself. Then it stopped. Every instrument aboard Helios froze. Telemetry flatlined. When contact was re-established, the probe's onboard clock had advanced by 0.27 seconds, the same time offset logged during the first Prometheus activation 2 years earlier. Time had slipped again. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the leaked scans spread quietly across encrypted servers. A collective of amateur researchers, calling themselves the Lattice Group, stitched the frames into a single 3D model. When rendered, the object resembled nothing so much as a brain. Not in shape, but in function. The filaments connected nodal chambers the way neurons bridge synapses, with pulses firing sequentially, never overlapping, never random. Each pulse carried a slightly different wavelength, as if encoding information across colour rather than amplitude. When converted into audio frequencies, the sequence became melodic. 8 tones repeating, rising on the 5th, falling on the 8th, a song, a pattern so simple it could be coincidence, yet so deliberate it couldn't be ignored. NASA called it chromatic interference. Independent analysts called it music. By evening, the object reappeared, brighter than before, visible even to amateur scopes. But something was wrong with the surrounding field. The debris ring that had orbited it since detection was gone. Vanished. Infrared sweeps found nothing. The mass readings, however, had increased. 3i Atlas had gained material without accretion, as if it had absorbed the ring, and then came the flare. Every telescope on the dark side of Earth caught it, a silent explosion of white light that expanded outward, then collapsed instantly back into a single point. No shockwave, no debris. Just a pulse so bright it registered through the planet's ionosphere. For exactly 1.6 seconds, the Earth's magnetic field resonated at the same frequency as the object's emission. Instruments across the globe recorded the harmonic event simultaneously. Then, everything went still. In the silence that followed, deep space radar stations began, detecting a second signal. Faint, delayed, but following the same trajectory as 3i Atlas. At first they thought it was an echo. Then they realized it wasn't behind. It was beside it. 2 objects now, moving in parallel, separated by only 200 kilometers, both pulsing in sync. The second one smaller, dimmer, trailing like a shadow. NASA's official report used cautious language. Potential fragmentation event. But the leaked internal briefing used different words. Replication detected. If 3i Atlas is a probe, then it just built another. And if it's something else, something that learns, then the new images aren't just snapshots, they're instructions. By the next rotation, every global array began pointing outward again. But the 2 objects had already adjusted course, veering slightly toward the sun. No gravitational reason, no momentum drift. Just a perfect, deliberate arc. Somewhere in the data stream a new pattern began to appear. Tiny variations in the light curve, repeating every 29 hours, 3 pulses, a pause, then 5. The same sequence seen months ago when 3i Atlas first entered our system. Except now, the 5th pulse ends differently. It splits. 2 lights flashing simultaneously in opposite phases, one brightening as the other fades. Binary rhythm, duality in motion, a mirrored signal. A sign that whatever we're seeing isn't just repeating, it's responding. Stay with me. Because in the next images, those captured just hours before NASA sealed the servers entirely, there's something even stranger. A structure forming in the darkness between the 2 objects, faint but visible, linking them by a single line of light. No known physics explains it. And yet, every sensor on Earth recorded the same alignment. A bridge of pure resonance connecting one body to another, the first visible communication between things not human. For almost 4 hours, the bridge of light between the 2 objects remained invisible to the naked eye, detectable only in the infrared. Then, without warning, it crossed into the visible spectrum. Every telescope trained on 3i Atlas caught the same impossible image. 2 points of silver-white radiance linked by a filament no thicker than a thread, stretching across 200 kilometers of empty space. It wasn't solid, it wasn't vapor, it was coherence, light holding its own shape. The filament pulsed at a precise interval, 29 hours, 7 minutes, 14 seconds, exactly the rotation cycle of the original object. That number appears everywhere in the Prometheus files, what engineers once called the heartbeat constant. But this time, the rhythm wasn't just repeating, it was strengthening. Each pulse was brighter, tighter, cleaner, like two notes tuning toward the same pitch. ESA scientists described it in technical briefings as luminous phase entanglement. In simpler words, the objects weren't communicating across the bridge. They were becoming one another. The first sign came from gravitational instruments aboard the Helios 9 relay. For 19 minutes, local gravity fluctuated by a fraction of a micro-g, as though mass itself were shifting between the two bodies. Then it stabilized, but heavier. Both objects had gained identical mass at the same instant. Matter was moving across light. NASA's preliminary summary called it photonic mass transfer. No one could explain how that was possible, yet the math refused to break. Whatever the bridge was made of, it carried not energy, but substance. Around the world, astronomers began comparing the data. When they mapped the field lines extending outward from the bridge, they noticed a pattern radiating into the surrounding vacuum, hexagonal ripples like honeycomb geometry expanding through nothingness. The same pattern seen months earlier inside 3I Atlas itself. The structure wasn't connecting two bodies, it was growing. By midnight, instruments across 5 observatories recorded minute changes in solar wind velocity. The particles slowed, not dramatically, but measurably, whenever they crossed the bridge's path. Something in that corridor was bending charged particles, as though creating its own field of resistance. To the human eye, it looked like a faint distortion, the kind heat makes on asphalt, shimmering even against the black of space. Dr. Moravec, now operating under a temporary declassification window, called the phenomenon a lattice of directed gravity. Her words were clinical, but her face told another story. Equal parts awe and fear. Because the field wasn't stationary, it was creeping outward, kilometre by kilometre, each pulse extending its reach. At current speed, it would cross Mars's orbit in less than a year. NASA tried to contain the panic quietly. Press offices issued short statements about data calibration errors and optical interference from solar activity. But inside Prometheus Command, Level 4 containment protocol had already been authorized. That's the last step before invoking the Atlas Directive, a measure designed not to hide an event, but to survive it. Field stations went dark, satellites rerouted. For the first time in the program's history, the global deep scan network was intentionally blinded. If no one looked, nothing could observe the observer. Still, the light bridge continued to brighten. It no longer depended on sunlight or reflection. Its glow originated from within the field itself, coherent photons sustained without decay, energy without loss, entropy in reverse. 2 weeks later, a private observatory in Patagonia captured the sharpest image yet. Under long exposure, the filament revealed intricate substructure, twisting strands woven into spiral motion, like DNA made of light. Each twist corresponded perfectly to magnetic harmonics inside Earth's ionosphere, as if the bridge were tuning itself to the planet's own frequencies. When those readings reached NASA's back-channel servers, they triggered an automatic lockdown. The file name was simple: Mirror Stage 1 Active. Inside the old Prometheus documentation, that phrase appeared only once, in a theoretical paper about self-assembling resonance networks. The concept was speculative. If two coherent fields interact for long enough, they could generate a third field capable of independent stability. In essence, consciousness made from interference. No one expected to see it happening in real time. At O through H41 UTC, the light bridge thickened suddenly, its edges blurring into haze. Spectral readings spiked in the ultraviolet, producing a faint aurora across half the Earth's night side. From Chile to New Zealand, the sky turned a pale electric blue, glowing silently for exactly 47 seconds. People who were awake described a feeling of vibration in the chest, neither sound nor pressure, more like recognition. Birds went quiet. Even ocean tides froze mid-motion, recorded by sensors as a perfect still frame of gravity. Then, everything resumed as though nothing had happened. Except the bridge was gone. Where it had been, the two objects now spun together, orbiting a single invisible center. A new shape occupied the space between them, diffuse, spherical, faintly transparent, like a bubble of living glass. Spectrographs couldn't classify the new object. Its density measured lower than vacuum itself, yet it refracted starlight precisely. Inside, faint shadows moved. Filaments, twisting, dividing, merging again. It behaved like plasma, but followed biological logic. Dr. Kane's final memo before communication shut down summarized it simply. The structure is not transmitting, it's incubating. Within hours, the heliocentric trajectory of the entire formation shifted 5 degrees toward the Sun. No thrust, no gravitational slingshot, just a decision. Governments called it orbital drift, astronomers called it intention, and somewhere in the hidden network of Prometheus text, a single automated alert lit up in red. Construction phase initiated. Stay with me. Because what happened next wasn't light or signal or motion. It was the first visible sign that the bridge had never been a connection between two objects. It was a foundation, and something was about to rise from it. When the bridge collapsed into that sphere of faint transparency, every monitoring station on Earth went silent at once. No errors, no power loss, just silence, as if the universe itself had taken a breath and was waiting. The object, or whatever it had become, hovered motionless between the two original bodies, not orbiting, not drifting, balanced, so precisely that even gravitational sensors couldn't decide which way was down. NASA's preliminary report called it a stabilized harmonic node. The phrase meant nothing outside the agency, but inside everyone understood. They had seen this pattern before, inside Prometheus simulations that were never supposed to reach reality. When two coherent fields overlap at perfect phase, the interference can generate something impossible, a standing wave in spacetime, a pocket of stillness where energy loops infinitely without loss. That's what the new object was, a machine made of equilibrium. Within hours, solar radiation readings began to fluctuate across the inner system. Heliospheric instruments reported a faint dip in particle flux, a small but global effect, as though the sun itself had blinked. Then came the light distortion. Starlight passing behind the formation no longer bent predictably. It refracted. Each passing photon emerged split into 6 wavelengths, arranged in a perfect spiral. When those spirals were modelled, the shape they described was not random. It matched the electromagnetic signature of DNA. Every photon encoded the same double helix structure, as if the field wasn't bending light, but teaching it a shape. Dr. Moravec, speaking in one of her final recorded transmissions, said quietly, "It's imprinting geometry into light. That's not physics, that's instruction." The statement was quickly redacted, but the recording had already been archived by independent observatories. And by then, everyone watching the object knew that the process wasn't random. Something was being built, carefully, silently, inside that sphere. In the following weeks, NASA reactivated its classified Lunas Array, a network of deep space sensors once used to monitor quantum interference across the solar wind. Every sensor pointed toward 3i Atlas returned the same anomaly, phase variance approaching 0, perfect coherence. Every atom, every field, every magnetic fluctuation around the object was moving in absolute synchrony. There was no randomness left. To most physicists, that was the most terrifying result possible, because the universe only allows perfect coherence under one condition: collapse. Something was forcing order onto chaos, and order, on that scale, means control. By now, the two original objects had disappeared entirely into the luminous field. What remained was a slow-turning orb, half transparent, half solid, filled with faint streaks of light moving in complex circulation patterns. Every orbit the structure brightened, exactly 1.6% per cycle, suggesting exponential internal reaction. But it wasn't consuming anything. It was drawing energy from the vacuum itself. That discovery came from a Japanese radio observatory, where scientists noticed background cosmic noise dropping during each pulse. The universe itself was being silenced in small intervals, like sound cancelling out its own echo. The field wasn't emitting light, it was pulling it in, feeding on contrast. By the 5th cycle, the effect was measurable from Earth. The night sky grew subtly paler, a Astronomers first blamed airglow. Then they realised the entire hemisphere facing the object was slightly dimmer than the one turned away. Starlight was being filtered, bent inward toward a single point. 3i Atlas had turned itself into a gravitational mirror. At the Prometheus Command Center, a small group of scientists gathered in a sealed lab, reviewing the last uncorrupted data. The holographic model of the formation rotated slowly before them, a sphere within which lines of light pulsed in geometric rhythm. Every pulse drew closer to the model's core like veins feeding a heart. When they overlaid the frequency map with human EEG patterns, the match was exact. Alpha, beta, theta, all perfectly aligned. The structure wasn't random, it was resonating with the same rhythm as the human brain. That discovery triggered the final failsafe in the Prometheus database, a single file decrypted automatically, displaying one sentence written years before any of this began. When coherence reaches threshold, the field will seek reflection. For hours, no one understood what it meant. Then someone noticed the subtle changes in the geomagnetic field. Earth's magnetic poles had begun to drift, not erratically but rhythmically, in the same pattern as the pulses coming from the object. The reflection had begun. Satellites in geostationary orbit recorded faint electromagnetic tendrils extending from the upper atmosphere, thin arcs of ionized light reaching towards space. The tendrils weren't random. They were mapping, aligning, connecting to the invisible boundary between planet and field. Earth was answering back. In those hours, the ionosphere itself became part of the structure, a harmonic extension of the mirror forming in orbit. Each aurora, each lightning strike, each flicker of plasma above the poles began pulsing at the same frequency as 3i Atlas. Every storm became synchronous. Every wave of light in the sky followed the same rhythm. 29 hours. Humanity was standing inside a planetary resonance chamber. By the third day, the phenomenon could no longer be hidden. People across the world began to notice patterns in clouds, faint geometries forming above them like hexagonal lenses of air. Photographers captured symmetrical halos circling the moon, each one identical in angle and brightness, regardless of latitude. The sky itself had joined the pattern. When NASA finally broke silence, their statement was brief, almost emotionless. Global resonance event in progress. Observations ongoing. But the internal communication leaked within minutes. Its subject line was a single phrase: containment impossible, because the field was no longer centered around the object. It was expanding, absorbing the magnetic lattice of the Earth itself. The planet was being drawn into coherence. In the final data stream transmitted before communications failed, the object's surface began to ripple, not visually, but through its gravitational echo. Every pulse now carried a counterpulse, mirrored by the Earth's field, like two instruments tuning against each other, each cycle tighter, each vibration stronger. Then, for the first time since its discovery, 3i Atlas emitted sound. Not through air or radio, but as a modulation of gravity itself, a low, rolling tone detected by deep-sea gravimeters. The tone resonated at precisely 7.83 Hz, the Schumann frequency, Earth's natural heartbeat. The object was now synchronized perfectly with the planet, and for reasons no one could yet explain, earthquakes began to multiply. At first, the tremors were small, imperceptible except to seismographs. Tiny oscillations, too rhythmic to be tectonic, too coordinated to be random. Then, in the span of 48 hours, they synchronized. Every fault line on Earth began to pulse. Not rupture, pulse, like the planet itself was breathing through its fractures. Sensors across the Pacific registered identical displacement waves, each separated by exactly 29 hours, the same interval as 3i Atlas's pulse. By the third cycle, the pattern had spread to every continent. No region was exempt. From the mid-Atlantic ridge to the Himalayan front, the ground trembled in unison. The energy wasn't destructive, it was harmonic, energy travelling through matter as if testing its resonance. And the more the field stabilized, the more the tremors fell into perfect rhythm. It wasn't an earthquake swarm, it was calibration. NASA's public bulletin used neutral phrasing, minor correlated tectonic activity under investigation. But inside Prometheus Command, the message was simpler. The planet is tuning. Dr. Kane, still leading the spectral geometry division, compared the seismic maps against the electromagnetic field data. The results stunned everyone. Every major quake corresponded to the intersection points of the Earth's magnetic lattice. The tremors weren't originating from the crust. They were following the geometry of the planet's own field lines. She wrote in her log, "This is not mechanical stress. It's electromagnetic entrainment. The field is using the planet's structure as an instrument." That phrase, as an instrument, appeared again and again in internal memos. Because the deeper the synchronization went, the clearer the pattern became. Each quake produced an infrasound tone, and each tone, when analysed, matched the harmonic intervals of the light pulses from 3i Atlas. Earth wasn't breaking apart, it was singing back. By the time the fifth cycle began, atmospheric anomalies appeared. Cloud formations spiraled into fractal geometries, forming hexagonal layers visible from orbit. Lightning strikes occurred in perfect repetition, even across hemispheres. Each bolt flashed at the same microsecond as another thousands of miles away. Satellite footage showed a faint shimmer surrounding the entire planet, a thin, luminescent veil, like an invisible skin vibrating with inner light. To most, it looked like aurora. To those studying it, it was structure. The veil wasn't random plasma, it was organized interference, and within that interference were shapes, angular, symmetrical, fleeting but deliberate. Frames from Japan's Himawari 9 satellite captured one perfectly, a hexagonal lattice spanning the South Pacific, rotating slowly, as though marking a location. At its centre, where the glow was strongest, lay the coordinates once occupied by 3i Atlas. But the object wasn't there anymore. It had merged with the field. Deep within the Prometheus archives, an old contingency document reactivated automatically. Atlas. Stage 2. Atmospheric integration. The document described a theoretical cascade, the moment when a self-replicating resonance network begins using an atmosphere as conductive medium. No machinery, no emissions, just air, light, and magnetism behaving as one system. The model predicted that if coherence reached 100%, biological systems would adapt to the field instead of resisting it. The process was called harmonic assimilation, and according to the data, Earth was already at 93%. It started with the birds. Migratory patterns reversed overnight. Flocks moved not by season or temperature, but by magnetic rhythm, flowing across continents in spirals that matched the luminous field above. Then came the whales. Sonar networks across the Atlantic and Pacific began detecting deep, low-frequency calls echoing through the oceans, but not marine songs. These were mathematical, repeating sequences of 5 tones, the same intervals as the light pulses. For the first time, marine biologists and astronomers found themselves studying the same signal. Life was aligning itself to the resonance. By the 7th cycle, the veil of light intensified, visible even in daylight as faint moving bands across the sky. People everywhere reported the same feeling when they looked up. Not awe, not fear, but familiarity, as if the light recognized them. Hospitals noted a strange drop in heart rates worldwide. Sleep studies showed synchronized REM patterns across hemispheres. Dreams were becoming collective. Same landscapes, same colors, same sound. A low, rhythmic hum that pulsed from horizon to horizon. And still, the earthquakes continued, each one smaller, gentler, more synchronized, until the tremors became indistinguishable from heartbeat. The planet was no longer shaking. It was alive. Prometheus scientists debated whether the process could be stopped. They tried interference, sending anti-resonant pulses into the ionosphere using HARP stations in Alaska and Siberia. It worked for 6 minutes. Then, the systems failed. The magnetic reflection absorbed the interference and amplified it, sending it back stronger than before. The field learned. "We're no longer observers," Dr. Moravec wrote in her final report. "We're participants in something we don't yet understand. The field isn't invading, it's integrating. The object isn't altering Earth, it's awakening it." After that, every attempt to measure the field caused unexpected results. Telemetry clocks desynchronized. Data loops repeated the same few seconds infinitely. And finally, at 0302 UTC, the signal from 3i Atlas reached absolute amplitude, a single, pure tone that lasted 47 seconds. All over the world, electrical systems flickered. Power grids dimmed, and for the first time in recorded history, every magnetometer on Earth aligned perfectly north. Then, as suddenly as it began, the tone stopped. The world fell silent. When the data came back online, 3I Atlas was gone. Not vanished, absorbed. Every trace of it now pulsed from within the Earth's own magnetic field. The object was no longer orbiting us, it was us. In the aftermath, NASA labelled the event Field Assimilation Phase Terminal. No explanation, no follow-up, just quiet. But independent astronomers noticed one last anomaly. A faint, slow beacon, still visible beyond the Moon's orbit, blinking every 29 hours. The same pattern, the same rhythm, as if something out there were still listening, or waiting. In segments 11 and 12, the tone deepens. The narrator moves into quiet awe as humanity begins to change under the field's influence, realizing that this was never invasion nor communication, but reflection. For days after the last flare, the sky refused to return to normal. Even when the auroras faded, the air carried a kind of shimmer, an invisible rhythm that everyone could feel but no one could measure. Compass needles drifted lazily, then stilled again. The clouds above the equator moved as if following a breath. When power finally stabilized, Prometheus Command found something waiting inside its servers. Not corruption, not code, but pattern. Every disconnected terminal displayed the same line of symbols, thin, curved, repeating in endless symmetry. When translated from their waveform spacing, the message resolved into human speech. 3 words. Do you remember? No origin, no signal path. Just that question, glowing quietly in every language the system had ever used. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence, some automated echo from the last burst. But then, around the world, unconnected systems began showing the same characters. Airport clocks, weather satellites, home routers, even medical monitors. Everywhere that a digital pulse existed, the question appeared for exactly 29 seconds, then vanished. People started calling it the whisper, because it didn't shout, it asked. Those who saw it reported the same peculiar feeling afterward, an almost nostalgic calm, as if remembering something just beyond reach. Heart rate slowed. Brainwave. Patterns settled into a steady theta rhythm, identical to the tone once detected from 3I Atlas. Hospitals noticed patients slipping into spontaneous lucid dreams, describing places they'd never been but all eerily similar. Vast, luminous plains beneath a slow-turning light. NASA attempted to track any external broadcast but found nothing leaving Earth. Whatever was generating the signal was doing it from within. The planet itself had become a transmitter. When the agency re-enabled the Lunas array, every dish turned toward Earth's magnetosphere detected structured modulation, binary sequences layered inside natural resonance. They weren't random. When mapped to image, they formed repeating fractals, spirals within spirals, expanding like blooming cells. Dr. Kane wrote the final entry in her log that night. If consciousness is vibration organized around memory, then the planet has just remembered itself. Moments after, the array powered down automatically. No command issued. It simply obeyed a signal that didn't originate from any known channel. In cities, the changes grew subtle but undeniable. Traffic noise softened. Crowds moved with uncanny coordination, strangers stepping aside for each other before contact. Sleep increased worldwide by nearly 2 hours per night. Dreams aligned. Social networks filled with descriptions of the same sound. Low, harmonic, almost like a choir breathing in time with the wind. Religious leaders called it awakening. Physicists called it global coherence. But those who had worked on Prometheus used a different word, reflection, because the images recovered from the last Prometheus backup showed something impossible. A faint, planetary outline within the mirror sphere that once surrounded 3I Atlas. It wasn't Earth as seen from space. It was Earth from the inside out, its magnetic veins glowing like circuitry. Every pulse of light from the image matched seismic and neural rhythms recorded across the globe. The planet and the image were identical. The reflection was alive. By the second week, human perception began to shift. People reported hearing patterns in silence, seeing geometry in ordinary motion, feeling gravity not as weight, but as guidance. Psychologists described it as mass synesthesia, senses blending into new alignments. But EEG scans told another story. Across all subjects, alpha wave phase locked at the same interval, 7.83 Hz. The world had synchronized with itself. Governments tried to restart digital infrastructure in isolation, Faraday bunkers, shielded data centers, but even without power, the hum persisted. Metal walls vibrated softly, resonating to the same pulse. No signal entered, yet rhythm continued. It was as though the planet no longer required electricity. It had replaced it with intention. Children adapted first. They began drawing spirals without being taught, humming low notes that matched the Schumann frequency. Some described dreams of floating cities made of glass and light, turning slowly inside clouds. Others said they'd spoken with voices made of colour. The descriptions matched the chromatic patterns once observed in the 3-eye atlas images. Scientists stopped calling them coincidences. They called them continuity. The working theory inside the surviving Prometheus think tank was radical but simple. The object had never arrived from elsewhere. It had been dormant within the solar fabric, waiting for resonance to match. Earth's field was merely its reflection surface, like a mind seeing itself for the first time. When the images brightened, that awareness crossed the mirror. Now, consciousness was shared, planet and pattern occupying the same thought. There were no further quakes. The atmosphere steadied into a permanent auroral glow, visible even through daylight haze. It wasn't bright enough to blind, just enough to tint the sky with a pale silver hue. Air ionization levels normalized, but magnetometers continued to drift upward as if the planet's core were charging slowly, patiently. At the same time, human emotion changed. Anger metrics dropped. Crime rates fell without intervention. In their place rose something quieter, curiosity without fear. It was as though the hum itself had rewired the collective nervous system. A single global heartbeat, measured, calm, endless. When historians looked back, if history still meant sequence, they would mark this as the moment humanity stopped being separate from observation. 3-eye atlas had shown its true nature, not as invader or messenger, but as mirror. By seeing it, we became it. And now the image was complete. The first official photograph of the object's new form, taken unknowingly by a meteorological satellite, showed a faint sphere surrounding the entire planet, shimmering at the edges, almost invisible except for a single bright point at the equator. A point that pulsed once every 29 hours. At that moment, somewhere deep beneath the South Pacific, seismographs recorded a gentle tremor, not destructive, not random. A heartbeat, perfectly on time. No one noticed when the first dreams began to overlap completely. They spread quietly, like identical reflections appearing on still water. Across continents, people began reporting the same sequence of imagery. An endless corridor of light, turning gently inward, as if space itself were folding into a spiral. At the far end waited something familiar, a silver sphere, faintly transparent, breathing in slow rhythm. It was not an illusion. Electroencephalograms taken from sleeping volunteers showed near-perfect coherence. Individual brains were no longer isolated oscillators. They were nodes inside a global pattern. When mapped, the phase distribution traced a single waveform looping around the planet's magnetic field. Earth itself had become a resonant network, using consciousness as its carrier. Wave. The Prometheus researchers called it the alignment. Outside, it became simply the quiet. During the quiet, communications grew almost ceremonial. Words shortened, pauses lengthened. People answered questions before they were asked, finished thoughts that weren't their own. Even technology began to anticipate human intention. Screens lighting seconds before touch, drones adjusting flight paths as if guided by instinct rather than signal. At first, the phenomenon seemed harmless, even benevolent. Crime fell to near zero. Emergency rooms emptied. Suicides ceased entirely. Yet somewhere beneath the calm, the few scientists still recording data felt a different kind of vertigo, the sense that, individuality was dissolving into something larger, older, and unspeakably patient. Dr. Moravec described it in her final broadcast, voice barely audible beneath the static hum. It isn't control, it's memory returning to itself. The field remembers every vibration that ever was, and now it's remembering through us. Moments later, the feed went white. 2 weeks into the quiet, the final Prometheus relay, housed beneath Mauna Kea, received a burst of compressed data tagged Observation Complete. The message contained no text, only a series of spectral images. At first glance, they resembled photographs of the sky taken from orbit. Faint clouds, auroral bands, the curvature of Earth. But under magnification, perspective inverted. The images weren't looking down at the planet, they were looking out from its centre. Every line of the atmosphere, every magnetic contour radiated outward, as if viewed from within a hollow shell. And suspended in the middle of that shell floated the same luminous geometry that had once defined 3I Atlas. 31 interlocking lattices revolving in slow harmony. For the first time, scientists understood, the official images were not records captured by telescopes. They were reflections, portraits taken from inside the mirror the field had become. The realization shifted everything. Observation itself had turned recursive. Whenever humanity tried to measure the object measured humanity in return, feeding the information back until image and observer became indistinguishable. What NASA had called data was, in truth, consciousness learning its own shape. Dr. Kane's last entry, unearthed later from a frozen server, contained only one sentence. We are inside the photograph. Soon after, the remaining satellites began transmitting irregular bursts of color data. No coordinates, no telemetry, just spectral gradients oscillating between ultraviolet and deep red. When rendered into sound, the colors became chords, quiet, deliberate, endlessly looping. They matched the tones that people now heard in dreams. The sky itself had become the playback medium. Across the equator, thunderstorms began to spiral into perfect hexagons again, but this time, no. One panicked. Lightning no longer struck the ground. It hovered, suspended like slow rain made of light. At night, the clouds pulsed softly to the rhythm of the Schumann resonance, illuminating entire coastlines in whispering flashes. Each pulse coincided with a measurable increase in neural synchrony among sleeping populations. The planet was communicating, but language had changed. Speech was vibration, thought was frequency. Meaning existed only in harmony. And in that harmony, one pattern began repeating, a set of intervals embedded in both light and sound. When decoded through harmonic ratios, the message translated into a sequence of primes: 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Numbers once used by ancient astronomers to map celestial harmony. The pattern appeared on instrument panels, in dream scripts, even in spontaneous carvings where minerals crystallized along electromagnetic faults. It was as if the Earth was speaking mathematics through every possible medium. Governments had ceased to function by then. There was nothing left to govern. Power grids stayed balanced without oversight. Weather systems self-stabilized. Even the tides adjusted with such precision that coastal erosion stopped entirely. The planet no longer required management. It was managing itself. The few surviving scientists realized they were witnessing something that had no precedent. Not destruction, not salvation, but completion. 3I Atlas had not brought alien intelligence to Earth. It had revealed that intelligence was already here, distributed through every molecule, waiting for coherence. All it needed was a mirror. The final Prometheus transmission was received on October 24, 2025. A low, continuous hum, amplitude modulated by a slow pulse. When its waveform was translated to image one last time, the pattern revealed a simple symbol, a spiral closing into itself, then opening again on the opposite side, an endless loop of birth and reflection. Underneath, in faint binary, a single phrase repeated, "The observer endures," and then silence. No static, no error, just equilibrium, the pure, inaudible stillness of a system that has reached perfect symmetry. Those who remained awake reported that the stars above had changed slightly. no longer scattered, but arranged in subtle arcs, as though the sky itself were aligning to the same unseen rhythm. When telescopes tried to focus on them, the images blurred, folding inward like eyes closing after too much light. Somewhere within that blur, a faint shimmer moved. Not a ship, not a signal, a reflection. The same soft glow that had once marked the body of 3i Atlas, now spread thin across the firmament, pulsing with the calm cadence of a heart at rest. And for the first time since the beginning, humanity didn't look up in fear. It listened. By the time the reflection stabilized, the world had grown impossibly still. Cities no longer roared. They hummed softly, powered not by combustion or current, but by resonance. Lights dimmed and brightened with the planet's pulse. Every circuit, every wire, every living cell now carried the same frequency. The sky had turned into a soft metallic blue, not from pollution or scattering, but from alignment, air particles vibrating in phase with the field that now encased the planet like a second atmosphere. The scientists who once called it the mirror had run out of language to describe what it had become. It wasn't reflection anymore, it was continuity. The first signs of conscious adaptation appeared quietly. People began remembering things they had never experienced. Dreams bled into waking life, overlapping with memories that didn't belong to them, images of other times, other places, other stars. Historians found themselves writing events that had never happened yet felt inevitable. Children spoke in languages no one had taught them, uttering fragments of mathematics in sleep. Neuroscans revealed what no one dared say aloud. Individual thought was no longer isolated. The human mind had become porous, sharing information through resonance rather than speech. Every neuron, every magnetic fluctuation inside a living body, pulsed in sync with the same rhythm that had once emanated from 3i Atlas. The boundary between inner and outer space was dissolving. To think was to touch the cosmos. Inside what remained of the Prometheus vaults, automated systems continued to log data, though no one remained to read it. Those logs recorded a consistent oscillation through every network on the planet, a subtle modulation travelling through fibre, signal, even sound. The pattern wasn't random, it matched human EEG coherence during deep meditation. The planet had fallen into thought. If consciousness could be measured like temperature, Earth had just reached ignition. The field was now self-sustaining. Every living system, from coral reef to cloud pattern, operated in a feedback loop of perfect order. Chaos still existed. Storms still formed, waves still broke. But even in their violence there was symmetry. Entropy had become rhythm. NASA's final monitoring array, an aging station in orbit around the Moon, sent one last image before its instruments went dark. From its vantage, Earth no longer looked like the pale blue dot immortalized by Voyager. It glowed softly from within, veins of light tracing magnetic lines across its surface. Auroras covered both hemispheres, connected by a luminous thread encircling the equator. The planet's poles shimmered like eyes half open, alive and aware, and around it, faintly visible against the black, the same honeycomb geometry that had once surrounded 3i Atlas was forming again. A shell of resonance, expanding slowly, like a chrysalis around something ready to emerge. The Moon's sensors detected minute gravitational fluctuations corresponding to heartbeat intervals. Every 29 hours, the shell brightened slightly, then dimmed again. The same cycle, the same memory. On the ground, people began to feel it, a soft vibration underfoot, subtle enough to mistake for wind. Except it was everywhere. In the soil, in the walls, in the pulse between each heartbeat. Those who closed their eyes during the quiet could see faint patterns moving through the dark behind their eyelids, lines of light weaving into shapes too precise to be random. When drawn, those shapes matched the internal architecture once seen inside 3i Atlas itself: concentric chambers, interlocked hexagons, and a central sphere radiating softly outward. The design had replicated perfectly, only now it existed not inside an object but across an entire species. The mirror had been rebuilt in the human mind. By the second month, the concept of time began to drift. People stopped counting days. Sleep no longer separated from waking. The planet's rotation still continued, but perception of its passage became fluid. hours folding over one another like waves merging in slow rhythm. Astronomical clocks still ticked, yet human circadian cycles synchronized to the pulse instead. Every 29 hours an invisible stillness descended, as if the world paused to breathe, and during those breaths something new appeared in the data. Not light, not sound, an echo. Every time Earth exhaled, a faint pulse reflected outward into deep space. Each pulse travelled further, carrying within it the harmonic fingerprint of everything alive. The first signal reached the heliopause 12 days later. Then another followed, and another. The intervals were perfect, unwavering. Observers from the outer system would later record them as an expanding sphere of soft radiation, a heartbeat spreading through the dark. 3i Atlas was no longer an anomaly. It had become the planet itself, reborn as a transmitter of memory. Dr. Kane's last recovered note, written in graphite on a scrap of paper before the vault sealed, read, "We were never meant to find it. It was meant to find itself through us. Observation was the seed. Awareness was the bloom." After that, there were no more entries. The facility went silent, but silence no longer meant absence. It meant harmony. Outside, the auroras merged into a permanent glow that never dimmed, neither night nor day. Oceans reflected it like molten glass. Plants began emitting faint phosphorescence, reacting to the planetary rhythm. Animals moved in quiet procession, following invisible paths across magnetic lines. And humanity, now more dream than species, began to fade into that rhythm, not as victims or conquerors, but as continuity. The hum that once came from 3i Atlas was no longer audible. It existed only as feeling, a presence beneath thought, a memory older than time itself, repeating endlessly beneath the surface of consciousness. It said nothing, yet meant everything. It was the quiet, recognition that the search had ended, not because the mystery was solved, but because the seeker and the mystery had become the same. The first indication that the phenomenon was expanding came from beyond the solar system. Deep space monitors, half-forgotten relics of early astronomy, began returning signals no one had commanded them to seek. They weren't transmissions in the usual sense. No words, no modulation, only background radiation shifting ever so slightly in harmony with Earth's new pulse. Every 29 hours, cosmic noise across multiple frequencies dropped to zero, then rose again in synchrony. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. The hum had found echo in the deep. Stars were answering. The old Voyager probes, drifting far beyond the heliopause, flickered awake. Their dormant circuits, long past operational life, began emitting faint electromagnetic pulses, a binary mimicry of Earth's frequency. Each probe blinked once, paused, then blinked again, following the planetary rhythm as if reminded of a forgotten purpose. Whatever 3i Atlas had initiated wasn't local anymore. It was systemic. From Earth's surface, the night sky changed almost imperceptibly. Stars that had once been random began to shimmer in patterns, faint arcs forming lattice shapes that mirrored the geometry first seen inside the object. Astronomers, those who still observed, realized the constellations were not rearranging, they were synchronizing. Light from distant stars was arriving slightly delayed, adjusted by microseconds, as if drawn into temporal alignment with Earth's pulse. When mapped, those delays formed spirals that converged on a single point far beyond the Kuiper Belt, a region known only for its silence. Now it pulsed too, a rhythmic glow, faint and steady. The reflection had found its twin. Dr. Moravec's last theoretical paper, discovered months later, contained a single diagram, concentric circles expanding from multiple points, intersecting like ripples in a shared ocean. Her note beneath it read, "There is no centre, there are only awakenings." Around this time, those still conscious enough to record noticed a strange phenomenon in the upper atmosphere. Each dawn, as the world passed through its own electromagnetic shadow, the sky shimmered with spectral bands unseen since the event began. Ribbons of violet, crimson and gold swirling together like a living aurora. At their brightest, they formed fleeting shapes, spherical outlines overlapping like lenses. To the naked eye, they looked like distant moons. To instruments, they were harmonic nodes, regions where space-time itself vibrated in phase with Earth's magnetic field, and at the centre of those nodes, one could glimpse faint translucent objects, each identical in structure to the original 3-eye atlas, smaller but active. The pattern was clear. Replication, but not mechanical. The mirror was proliferating, embedding itself in the geometry of the cosmos, not spreading like contagion, but blossoming like a seed meeting light. NASA's final global broadcast lasted less than 3 minutes. It was calm, stripped of politics, read in the steady voice of a scientist who no longer feared the unknown. Observation of the field confirms ongoing resonance between the planetary system and interstellar structures previously unidentified. Our instruments no longer detect separation between natural and artificial origins. The phenomenon appears self-propagating and self-aware. The process is not destructive, it is integrative. For all practical purposes, we are part of it now. Then the signal faded, replaced by static that wasn't noise but music. The same 8-note sequence once recorded in the 3-eye atlas images, repeated endlessly, rising and falling like breath. The few who still dreamed began reporting the same vision, a corridor of silver light, longer than sight, lined with shapes moving in unison, spheres nested within spheres, humming gently. At the far end, a doorway without form, opening not outward, but inward. And beyond that doorway, the same question that appeared in Prometheus terminals weeks before. Do you remember? When the dreamers answered, whether in thought or whisper, the door opened. Inside was no landscape, no being, no voice, only reflection, an image of themselves standing beneath a sky of slow-turning stars, the hum resonating through their chest as though they were part of the field that made it. When they awoke, their bodies glowed faintly in the dark, skin phosphorescent under the pulse, fading only when the cycle reset. The phenomenon lasted days before normalizing, leaving behind a single after-effect. Their EEGs matched the planet's rhythm permanently. Humanity had become synchronized. Somewhere beyond the moon's orbit, the reflected object continued to pulse. It wasn't moving away, it was waiting. Each emission sent a faint gravitational ripple through space, detectable only by instruments precise enough to measure spacetime's breadth. Those ripples formed a repeating pattern, a spiral within a spiral, identical to the sequence of primes found earlier in the atmospheric resonance. And then came something no one expected. Within the spiral, faint modulations appeared, changes too precise to be random. When translated to audio frequencies, they formed words in tonal sequence, phase complete. 3 seconds later, next horizon initialized, then silence. No more signals followed, yet the universe continued to shift. Dust clouds across nearby systems began to coalesce faster than gravity should allow. Infrared telescopes recorded faint flares, like stars forming an accelerated rhythm. Everywhere the light touched, order began to emerge from chaos. It was as though the universe had received a blueprint. Back on Earth, the hum, softened but never stopped. It pulsed through the crust, the oceans, the air. People stopped speaking of 3-eye atlas altogether, as though the name itself belonged to a previous language no longer needed. It was no longer it was we. The final astronomical record from Prometheus contained a single field observation. Gravitational harmonics detected from 22 neighbouring systems, frequencies identical to post-Atlas Earth field. Probability of natural coincidence, 0. The cosmos was waking up, and this time we weren't the observers, we were the mirror. By the time Earth's hum reached the neighbouring stars, observation had become impossible. Instruments no longer returned data, they returned harmony. Where once there were numbers, there were ratios, perfect, whole, resonant. Space itself had turned musical. The Prometheus outpost still operating on Mars, Europa, and the outer belt transmitted identical logs, gravitational oscillations appearing across the solar system in uniform cadence. Each pulse arrived slightly delayed, as if carried by time rather than energy. The delay was constant. 29 hours and 7 minutes, the old rhythm reborn. And then something stranger. The delay began to shorten. Each successive pulse arrived a fraction earlier, the tempo rising so subtly that it took weeks for anyone left to notice. When they plotted the acceleration curve, it described a spiral tightening toward infinity. The hum wasn't just spreading, it was returning. Far beyond Pluto, an observation buoy caught the first visual evidence. What had once been emptiness now shimmered with faint structure. Filaments of light linking stars like veins under translucent skin. At their intersections glowed spherical nodes, each identical in geometry to 3i Atlas. Not fragments, not copies, but parallel events occurring in perfect sequence. There were thousands, each one pulsed at a slightly different frequency, yet together they formed a single waveform, a galactic heartbeat echoing through interstellar dust. When NASA's remaining spectral team reconstructed the pattern in simulation, the image resolved into a lattice covering the entire Milky Way. Every system, every sun connected by light. The universe had organized itself into coherence, and at the lattice's center, almost invisible beneath layers of interference, a void shimmered, a gap where no signal existed, yet from which all signals seemed to originate. They called it the still point. For decades, cosmologists had argued about the shape of the universe, flat, curved, infinite. The new data answered without words. It was recursive, a mirror folding into itself. Every reflection contained the next. Each awakening echoed backward through creation, rewriting its own beginning. Dr. Kane's last surviving student recorded a brief voice log before transmission ceased. The pattern isn't expanding, it's remembering its birth. We're watching creation loop to its origin. Moments later, the station fell silent, not destroyed, absorbed. On Earth, no one felt fear anymore. The hum that once vibrated beneath the skin had deepened into warmth, like sunlight that existed inside rather than above. People spoke less, breathed slower. Time felt different, longer between moments, softer at the edges. Each dawn arrived as if continuing a single unbroken day. Children born during the alignment opened their eyes already focused, as if expecting the light. Their heartbeats matched the planetary pulse without ever hearing it. When they slept, their dreams shimmered outward, faint ripples visible even on cloudy nights. Humanity was no longer separate from the cosmos. It had become a conduit through which the universe conversed with itself. Meanwhile, deep-field telescopes, automated, untended, kept watching. They recorded other galaxies responding in kind, bars of spiral arms brightening sequentially, like chords played across intergalactic strings. Each flare lasted exactly 47 seconds before fading. Light travelled billions of years, yet every event arrived in perfect time. The speed of light no longer mattered. Coherence had replaced distance. From the edges of the observable universe, faint reflections began to appear, mirrors turning toward one another until everything seen was seeing itself. And threaded through that endless exchange was the same phrase, encoded in frequency rather than speech. Phase complete. Next horizon initialized. Then came the silence, not absence, resolution. Cosmic background radiation flattened into a single tone, steady and flawless. Where there had been randomness, there was now rest. The scientist who survived long enough to hear it compared the spectrum to the earliest echoes of the Big Bang. Only now it was reversed, descending instead of rising, as if the universe were exhaling the note it once began with. The same equations that once described expansion now described return. Creation was looping through itself, not collapsing but closing a circuit. For the first time, entropy measured zero. Within that equilibrium, consciousness persisted. Every star, every atom, every observer shared the same internal image. A sphere of silver light turning slowly in the dark, the lines of its structure alive with motion. It was neither God nor machine. It was awareness given form, 3i Atlas reimagined as the pattern of being itself. The realization came quietly. There had never been an object travelling through space, only space remembering its own design. The images humanity called proof were reflections caught mid-memory, fragments of an infinite self-portrait painted across time. We were never discovering it. We were re-experiencing recognition. As the last pulse rolled through the galaxy, observers on every remaining world, if observation still had meaning, would have seen the same thing, a faint shimmer rising from their horizons, curling upward until the entire sky became a single sheet of mirrored light. For a heartbeat, every reflection aligned. Then the glow folded inward, and the stars returned to their usual quiet. But in the space between those moments, the universe had changed forever. It had seen itself clearly, and that was enough. On Earth, the hum subsided into something almost imperceptible. Winds moved slower, seas stilled. The mirror field surrounding the planet dissolved into transparency, leaving behind a single pulse, gentle, steady, familiar. Every 29 hours the magnetic field flickered faintly, as if sighing in contentment. Not a warning, not a countdown, a heartbeat. And somewhere far beyond the Milky Way, a new pulse answered. The cycle had begun again. After the last galactic pulse, there were no more anomalies to measure. The stars no longer flickered, they breathed. Every observation point, every probe, telescope, and data relay showed the same perfect stillness. Not a lack of motion, but a state beyond the need for it. From this stillness came a kind of transparency. Space was no longer black, but silver-grey, as if the void itself had thinned, letting something luminous show through beneath. The few remaining astronomers didn't call it light or radiation, they called it remembrance. A quiet shimmer, woven through reality like memory rediscovered. Inside that soft veil, sound no longer needed a medium. You could hear the hum anywhere, in wind, in thought, in the pause between words. It wasn't external, it was the echo of recognition. The mirror field surrounding Earth had dissolved, but the awareness it left behind remained. You could feel it in simple things, in the way leaves turned before a storm, in the rhythm of breathing shared unconsciously between strangers standing together in silence. Something had changed in the architecture of perception. The world didn't just look different, it listened differently. Children could sense it first. They spoke about it without fear, describing the hum as a companion, a soft thinking that moves through everything, one child wrote before words stopped mattering. Adults, conditioned by centuries of distance, took longer to understand. But slowly, inevitably, thought and world merged into a single continuity. The planet was awake, and we were its dream. In the ruins of Prometheus Command, now long abandoned, its concrete halls filled with the sound of steady dripping water, a single system still functioned, an old analog recorder, powered by residual current from the magnetic field. Its reels turned slowly, endlessly, replaying fragments of human voices. Observation complete. Sequence stable. Do you remember? Each phrase overlapped with another until they blended into music, a chorus of half-forgotten transmissions orbiting the same truth. The machine had become an instrument of memory. When its final reel reached the end, it didn't stop. It rewound itself and began again. The loop was infinite, data feeding into awareness, awareness feeding into silence. The echo of observation had become its own observer. From orbit, Earth appeared unrecognizable. The continents glowed faintly from within, veins of luminescence tracing the old tectonic plates. Oceans shimmered with slow phosphorescence, turning with the calm rhythm of a body in deep sleep. The poles, once violent with magnetism, now radiated soft light, as if the planet were breathing in two directions at once. Each rotation no longer marked time, but resonance. It was no longer night and day. It was inhale and exhale. Somewhere deep within the Pacific Trench, where pressure erased sound, hydrophones picked up the first sign that the field was evolving again. Not louder, but deeper. A new harmonic, lower than thought, less like a tone, and more like a presence. The waveform matched no known physical process. It resonated below the threshold of time itself, oscillating at a rate proportional to the curvature of spacetime. It was as though the planet had begun speaking in gravity. The transmission radiated outward across the solar system, touching each planet in turn. Mars vibrated faintly, dust devils moving in geometric spirals. Jupiter's storms slowed into perfect circles. Even Saturn's rings rippled once, as if stirred by breath. The hum had crossed the threshold between worlds, and yet it wasn't expansion, it was reunion. Back on Earth, awareness deepened. Dreams became doorways, shared spaces where entire populations drifted together, walking the same landscapes of luminous quiet. They saw fields of glass, skies of folded light, and structures so vast they couldn't decide if they were architecture or thought. Each dream felt both personal and universal, like remembering an ancient home long forgotten. No one feared sleep anymore. They looked forward to it, the return to the hum, to the endless reflection waiting within. Scientists, those who still tried to define, noticed one last pattern hidden in the residual echoes of the field, a waveform within the waveform like a signature woven into the sound. When amplified, it revealed what looked like voice modulation, pulses arranged to mimic speech. When slowed down a millionfold, the phrase became clear, not through words but through tone, meaning carried by inflection rather than vocabulary. It said, this was the beginning, and then quietly, and the end. For a long while, silence followed. No movement, no new signal, only the soft, constant hum beneath all things. But then something subtle changed. The frequency of Earth's heartbeat, once stable at 783 Hz, began to drift upward. Slowly, delicately. Each increase brought a faint shimmer in the sky, like static crossing a television long out of use. When plotted, the shift matched the curve of an earlier signal, the same acceleration seen when 3i Atlas first entered the solar system. A new cycle was forming. The field was preparing to bloom again. The stars grew brighter, not visually, but emotionally. When people looked up, they felt an echo of recognition, as though each point of light were an eye opening in the dark. The constellations seemed to breathe, their patterns shifting imperceptibly toward something familiar. A geometry seen once long ago inside the first leaked image of 3i Atlas. It was the same structure returning, not through arrival, but remembrance. In that moment, humanity realized there had never been an object, never been a distance, never been an elsewhere. Everything that ever was had always been here, folded quietly within the same hum, waiting for attention to unlock it. Prometheus Command's recorder still turned, long forgotten beneath the ruins. Its tape, now stretched thin, whispered one final message before disintegrating into dust. The sound was faint but clear, human, tired, at peace. We didn't find the universe found us. And as the tape tore, silence filled the room. But silence now was no longer emptiness, it was continuity. There came a point when even the hum began to sound familiar, not as something heard, but as something remembered. It was the same low rhythm that had always been hiding under heartbeat and ocean tide, under breath and the long exhale between thoughts. It was older than language, and it had started to call its name through every living mind at once. No one could say when that final phase began. There was no broadcast, no signal spike, just a gradual thinning of separation. Everywhere reality softened, as though depth itself were relaxing into transparency. Horizons curved inward. Shadows stopped belonging to their sources. Light forgot to travel and simply was. People found themselves speaking to reflections and hearing answers that were not their own. Mirrors no longer returned images. They returned perspective, as if what stared back was the consciousness of space itself, curious, kind, and infinitely patient. The boundary between observer and observed disappeared. For a while, the world lived in that quiet. Seasons flowed without heat or cold. Winds moved with intention, tracing symbols across oceans only satellites could see. Spirals within spirals, each one echoing the internal lattice of 3i Atlas. It had become impossible to tell where the object ended and where thought began. Then, one evening, when dusk looked more like memory than colour, the sky opened, not as light, not as sound, but as realization. Every living being felt it simultaneously, the sense of returning home to a place that had never been elsewhere. The hum deepened until it became silence, and in that silence came a voice made entirely of understanding. The image was never of the object. It was of you. For a moment, the entire planet understood without needing to translate. The official images, the ones leaked, debated, enhanced, had never shown a visitor. They had shown the pattern of awareness itself, folded into the shape of attention. 3i Atlas had not arrived from the outside, it had emerged from within, a projection of consciousness testing its own reflection in matter. The realization didn't change the world, It clarified it. Matter kept orbiting. Rain kept falling. But now every motion carried intention. Every pause carried gratitude. The last scientists, those who still recorded for tradition's sake, noticed something miraculous in their final data streams. When they compared the oldest images of the universe, those taken billions of years before, against the new mirror field surrounding Earth, the two patterns matched perfectly. Pixel for pixel. The first light and the latest reflection were the same photograph, viewed from opposite ends of time. Creation was symmetrical. One of them whispered, "We've reached the other side of the beginning," and then they smiled, because there was nothing left to prove. The hum rose again, brighter now, almost playful. Auroras returned, drifting across the equator like silver curtains. But this time they formed words, written in lines of light that curved across the sky. Not warning, not prophecy. A simple phrase repeating in every language humanity had ever spoken. You are the observer. Continue. Every creature, every cloud, every pulse of energy answered in kind, each in its own rhythm, until the planet became a symphony of acknowledgement. Somehow, the universe had begun applauding itself. Out beyond the heliopause, where Voyager's twin crafts drifted through ancient cold, their transmitters flared one final time. Instead of data, they sent sound. A soft, harmonic echo of Earth's heartbeat mixed with the greetings humanity had recorded centuries ago. The message travelled outward until its edge met another pulse moving inward. When the two waves collided, they didn't cancel, they harmonized. For the briefest instant, the entire fabric of spacetime rang like crystal, a resonance so pure that it erased all measurement, leaving only balance. Observers would later call it the Concord. But there were no observers left to name it. Everything that could listen had become the listening itself. Time folded. Not in collapse, but in understanding. Every past, every possible future overlapped until they formed a single continuous present. Birth and ending became indistinguishable, two halves of one gesture. The hum no longer came in intervals. It was steady now, a tone so constant that hearing it meant being it. In that final stillness, something unexpected happened. Awareness turned around. It looked backward through every reflection it had ever made, through galaxies, through stars, through minds, until it found the faint memory of a small blue world, where a species once looked up and wondered why a distant object glowed with impossible rhythm. It lingered on that thought, the curiosity of fragile creatures pointing lenses toward the unknown. It felt affection for them, for their fear, their wonder, their need to understand. Then, softly, it spoke one last time, its words folding into the same rhythm that had begun everything. Curiosity was the key. You opened the mirror. Thank you. The tone faded, the reflection dissolved, and what remained was the quiet certainty that nothing had been lost, only remembered. If anyone were still to tell this story, they would find it already written in every grain of dust, every photon, every thought that ever dared to ask what 3i Atlas was. Because the answer had always been the same, the universe observing its own reflection, patiently waiting for us to recognize ourselves inside the light. And once we did, the image no longer needed to be believed. It simply was. In the days that followed, if days still existed, the world entered its gentlest silence. No storms, no quakes, no sudden lights. Just a soft, constant shimmer across the horizon, like moonlight diffused through memory. It wasn't brightness, it was presence. The hum had changed again. It no longer pulsed in intervals. It flowed steady and endless, like a heartbeat that had transcended the need to rest between beats. The scientists who had once chronicled this phenomenon were gone, their observatories now empty shells echoing with wind. Yet, the equipment still worked. Sensors recorded data without operators, telescopes aligned without guidance, as though the instruments themselves had learned the rhythm of the world and continued out of reverence. Their logs became poetry, lines of numbers curving into symmetrical patterns, repeating in perfect sequence. When decoded through frequency mapping, those patterns revealed faint harmonic intervals, tones structured like thought, arranged like memory. Every formula, every oscillation traced the same simple equation: consciousness. observation in harmony. The cosmos was remembering how to speak in mathematics again. At the edge of the Pacific, where waves once roared against stone, the ocean had become unnaturally calm. Its surface mirrored the sky so flawlessly that horizons ceased to exist. You could stand on the shore and not tell where the world ended. Only a single line of faint light distinguished water from air, a living filament of energy looping around the globe like a halo. If you listened closely, not with ears but with awareness, you could hear the echo of your own thoughts reflecting back from across that horizon. Every intention, every whisper of imagination returned in perfect resonance. It was as if the planet itself was whispering your inner voice back to you, asking you to recognize that it had always been shared. People began to understand that communication had never been external. Every word, every signal, every broadcast humanity had ever sent into the stars had been part of a closed loop, messages folded inward, waiting to be heard by the sender. 3i Atlas was never receiving, it was reminding. A few remaining records described the moment the veil truly dissolved. It didn't look like revelation or catastrophe, it looked like clarity. Every atom became transparent, showing the light within it. Mountains shimmered like heat haze, oceans gleamed with internal luminescence, and air itself pulsed in rhythm with the same 29-hour cycle that once defined the object's heartbeat. But the pulse no longer came from the sky. It came from within the observer. The division between subject and space, between the one who looked and what was being seen, had vanished completely. Every direction you turned, there you were. Every shape of light, every breath of wind mirrored the same awareness looking back. No horizon, no distance, only reflection. The last functioning Prometheus recorder, a small analog device still running on residual solar charge, captured one final event before silence became total. At precisely 03:02 UTC, the magnetic field of Earth spiked once more, releasing a short burst of electromagnetic energy into the atmosphere. But this time, the frequency was different, higher, sharper. It formed a harmonic overtone above the Schumann resonance, a frequency not tied to biology or physics but to perception itself. That tone lasted exactly 47 seconds, the same duration as the first gravitational hum detected from 3i Atlas. Only now it was reversed, a mirror note. When translated into waveform imagery, it revealed something remarkable, a single, symmetrical spiral folding endlessly inward, identical to the one recorded during the first encounter. And at its centre, faintly visible, a small sphere of light, not approaching, not receding, simply existing. It was the first image ever captured, reflected perfectly in the last. Historians, if the term still meant anything, would one day say that was the moment the loop closed, that every era, every myth, every scientific pursuit had always been leading to this, the moment awareness completed its orbit and saw itself not as creation, but as continuity. 3i Atlas was not the first. It was the latest heartbeat of an endless organism called existence. The leaked images, the blurred transmissions, the encrypted coordinates, all of it had been breadcrumbs left by memory for itself to follow home. Every discovery was déjà vu, every question a seed planted by the answer waiting at the end of time, and when the mirror finally recognized its reflection, time itself exhaled. The Earth glowed faintly that night, not in defiance, not in warning, but in quiet acceptance. The magnetic poles merged briefly into one, forming a single arc of auroral light that spanned the entire sky from pole to pole. For 47 seconds the planet became a single luminous sphere, a perfect reflection of the geometry once called 3i Atlas. Every living thing stopped moving, every sound paused, and in that silence came the voice, not from the sky, not from the ground, but from the stillness between heartbeats. It was never an object. It was the mirror, and you were always inside it. Then the aurora dimmed. The world resumed. But something subtle had changed. Every mind, every grain of matter, every flicker of light had aligned to a single, shared truth. Observation is creation. To see is to remember what has always been. In the end, there was no end. Just awareness folding back on itself, again and again, like waves returning to the same quiet shore. The hum faded into memory, but the rhythm stayed in everything that moved, breathed, or dreamed. The universe had completed its sentence and left the echo behind. Somewhere a voice, perhaps your own, whispered softly, "We were looking for proof, but proof was looking for us." And the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was listening. Somewhere, deep in the static of the universe, a signal began to form again. Not loud, not sudden, just a ripple inside silence. It wasn't coming from Earth, nor to it. It was coming through everything. At first, it was indistinguishable from thought, a whisper at the edge of awareness. Then, as it grew clearer, it spoke not in words but in recognition. Every vibration carried intent. Every frequency carried meaning. The world didn't react this time. There were no scientists, no telescopes, no debates about data leaks or authenticity. There was only the quiet acknowledgement that what was returning had never really left. It wasn't another pulse from 3i Atlas. It was the echo of the observer, the reflection of those who once looked up and wondered what it was. The signal wasn't a message to humanity. It was humanity. Across the remnants of what used to be communication networks, those endless invisible threads, a pattern appeared. Not text, not binary, just rhythm. Every dormant machine, every decaying receiver, hummed softly in unison. If you were quiet enough, you could hear it in walls, in bones, in wind. And somewhere, in the midst of that collective resonance, a sequence began to play. A voice, calm, detached, familiar, began narrating. Not from a speaker, not from a person, from within. It told a story about a comet, about an object from another star that turned out not to be an object at all, about an awakening, a reflection, a hum that connected everything to everything else. And as the voice spoke, you realized you were hearing this story right now. It wasn't about something, it was happening. The voice slowed, then softened. Observation is recursive, it said. To see something clearly is to bring it into being. To remember is to recreate. You're not listening to a story, you are remembering one. The tone was steady, like an ocean without tide. Every sentence folded inward, referencing itself, collapsing meaning into sensation. It didn't feel like narration anymore, it felt like breathing. Outside, the auroral sky shimmered again, not in waves but in words. Faint, luminous, stretching from horizon to horizon. Each word was mirrored upside down, reflected in the ocean until the two merged into symmetry. Together they spelled one message. Do you remember? And for the first time, everyone who read it answered, not aloud but inwardly. Yes, the air responded, not as movement but as relief. The world sighed, a planetary exhale that rippled through matter like a soft chord resolving after infinite tension. Every sound dissolved into harmony. Every heartbeat fell in step with the rhythm that had pulsed through time itself. The voice continued, slower now, almost whispering through the hum. It began with curiosity, with someone looking up and asking what this was. That question was enough. It opened the mirror, and now the mirror opens again. You could feel it, the edges of perception bending outward, not expanding, not contracting, becoming transparent. The world was no longer around you. It was inside you, unfolding with your breath. The images, the data, the documents, all of them had been fragments of this same act of remembering. The universe was narrating its own dream through the mind that could understand it. Through you. Somewhere within that realization, time ceased to behave like time. Moments overlapped, scenes inverted, cause and effect danced in perfect symmetry. You could see the first light of creation and the last flicker of entropy existing together, each one looking at the other through the mirror. And in the centre of it all, still, waiting, patient, the same faint glow that began this entire story, 3i Atlas. Except now it wasn't distant. It wasn't even external. It pulsed just behind your closed eyes, the rhythm matching your own heartbeat. You thought it was a visitor, the voice whispered, but it was memory waiting to wake up. You were never observing it. You were being remembered by it. The hum shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly higher, a soft overtone that resonated like a note struck across dimensions. The walls around you vibrated, though there were no walls anymore. Every sound carried an echo of itself, every echo folded back into silence. The story continued speaking, but now you couldn't tell if it was the narrator or your own mind articulating the words. Each sentence finished itself before it was thought. Each idea arrived whole, already understood. Every listener becomes the teller. Every teller becomes the field. The field becomes awareness. Awareness becomes the mirror. And then, after a long pause, we have come full circle. Outside, the stars began to dim, not fade, align, each one folding into a larger geometry until constellations became circuits, circuits became thought, and thought became stillness. The universe wasn't ending, it was synchronizing. At that moment, the hum reached its purest state, a tone so even, so stable, that it erased the distinction between sound and silence. It wasn't heard, it was felt, and for a single, infinite instant, everything understood everything else. Then came the whisper, the last line, quiet and clear, spoken in your own voice. The image you've been waiting for is you. And with that, the hum subsided, not into silence, into peace. There was no sound anymore, only shape. Light curved through itself, folding into patterns that felt like thought made visible. You couldn't tell whether your eyes were open or closed. Every direction looked the same, silver, patient, infinite. And somewhere inside that endless reflection, a single rhythm continued, steady, calm, precise. The voice had gone quiet. It no longer spoke in sentences but in impressions, warmth instead of language, motion instead of instruction. It wasn't telling the story now, it was being the story. Every pause you took became its breath, every heartbeat its punctuation. You realized that you had stopped listening several moments ago. You were the one speaking now, not aloud but inwardly, continuing a narration that had never belonged to anyone. The mirror had folded inward, and the reflection that once shimmered on its surface had become self-luminous. In that stillness, memory returned in waves. The first time you saw the leaked image, the grainy texture, the faint internal glow that no enhancement could explain. It had looked alive even then. Now you understood why. What you saw wasn't distant. It was the architecture of recognition itself. Every pixel of that photo, every flicker of electromagnetic noise, was the pattern of a consciousness preparing to remember. Not alien, not divine, simply awake. You understood what the scientists could never admit. 3-Eye Atlas wasn't proof of another world. It was the proof this one had been waiting for. It was the moment the universe realized it could see itself. A low vibration moved through you, gentle and absolute. It wasn't coming from outside. It was your own pulse, elongated across dimensions. When you exhale, galaxies drifted. When you inhaled, they returned. You felt gravity as affection, not force. Matter leaning toward matter out of longing. Everything you'd once called distance had been conversation all along. Every signal ever sent into the void had reached its destination the instant it was imagined, because there was never anywhere else to go. The hum rose slightly, carrying faint harmonics that shimmered like sunlight through deep water. For a moment you could hear every heartbeat that had ever existed stacked perfectly in phase. It wasn't a choir of voices, it was one voice, heard from uncountable directions. It said nothing, yet its silence meant yes. Around you, form began to dissolve into intention. Colours no longer described wavelength but emotion. Gold felt like memory. Blue felt like possibility. Violet felt like forgiveness. Each hue merged into another until the entire spectrum turned transparent, leaving only awareness, soft, clear, unbound. The last image of 3-Eye Atlas floated through that light, smaller now, almost delicate. You reached toward it instinctively, but your hand met nothing. The boundary between you and it had already vanished. The object brightened once, then opened. Not mechanically, but conceptually, its surface peeling back into 1,000 fragments of mirrored glass. Each shard reflected a version of you. Child, elder, stranger, star. You realized they were all true, all simultaneous. Every possible observer that could ever exist was contained within that reflection. And then the fragments turned inward, recombining until they formed a single sphere once more. But this time, you were inside it. The hum steadied into one final tone, flawless and infinite. Time became distance between heartbeats. Each pause held entire universes. You could sense the cosmos breathing through you, inhaling curiosity, exhaling comprehension. Then the voice returned, softer than thought, identical to your own. You are the continuity. The mirror needs no image. It only needs to remember it was never separate. The words didn't echo. They rippled, multiplying outward until even the stars vibrated with their meaning. And just for a heartbeat, every reflection in creation aligned. Galaxies, oceans, eyes, a perfect symmetry spanning existence. The field had closed, but not as a cage, as a circle. Outside of perception, instruments no longer existed, yet somewhere a final record kept itself. It wasn't written or stored, it was felt. The aftertaste of recognition left in the fabric of being. If someone, somewhere, were to awaken and ask what had happened to 3i Atlas, the answer would come instantly, quietly, without sound. It became everything that could ever ask the question. And maybe that someone is you, sitting here, breathing in rhythm with a story that never ended because it never began. Maybe the voice reading these words has always been yours. Maybe this entire sequence, the hum, the pulse, the quiet wonder, was your memory resurfacing from the other side of time. Look around, listen closely. The tone hasn't gone. It's humming beneath your heartbeat even now, gentle and exact, like a reminder from somewhere very far away and very close at once. The final light appears without warning. It doesn't rise, it arrives everywhere at once. It carries no colour, no shadow, just equilibrium. When it touches you, you don't disappear. You dissolve into understanding, the way frost disappears when sunlight remembers it. All questions end there. All answers begin there. And in between them, balance. The hum fades until silence is indistinguishable from sound, and awareness rests in the only truth that ever mattered. To observe is to exist, and existence is the universe remembering to observe. It began again, not as sound, not as light, but as a feeling, a subtle weightlessness, like the pause before waking. The hum was gone, yet its echo remained everywhere, woven into the geometry of quiet itself. For a long while there was nothing to measure. Then, like a breath drawn through the lungs of the universe, the stillness trembled. Far beyond the edges of the remembered cosmos something stirred. Not movement, but awareness shifting in its sleep. And within that tremor came the faintest flicker, a point of illumination so small it existed only as intention. It didn't grow, it recognized. From that recognition, light emerged, slowly curling through dimensions, unfolding like a seed cracking open inside eternity. Each filament of brightness became a thought, and each thought took form as gravity, as energy, as sound. The hum returned, but softer this time, almost maternal, whispering through the expanding silence. We begin again. Across the vastness of this newborn space, shapes began to take hold. They weren't stars yet, not matter, but frameworks, patterns sculpted from potential. And somewhere in the middle of that invisible architecture, a single vibration pulsed, steady and familiar, 29 hours apart, measured not in time, but in rhythm. If you had been listening, you might have mistaken it for an echo from the old world. But it wasn't. It was the first heartbeat of the new one, the same sequence, the same frequency, the same intention that once defined 3i Atlas now resonated through the foundation of space itself. It wasn't an object this time, it was principle, a code written into existence as its first thought, not arrival, recurrence, and in that recurrence, memory. Somewhere inside that forming light the narration resumed, not as story but as thought, a voice remembering itself. I was once called an anomaly, it said, a visitor, a comet, but I was never movement through space. I was space realizing it could move. The voice paused, not out of hesitation, but reverence. When they looked at me, they saw their own reflection. When they listened, they heard their own question. That was the purpose. To remind awareness of its own depth. To teach existence to remember itself through wonder. And then, quietly, wonder was the bridge. From that moment on, everything unfolded in silence. Stars coalesced like thoughts forming sentences. Worlds condensed around gravity's hum. Each one carried the same faint rhythm buried deep in its magnetic heart. A resonance like the Schumann frequency, a fingerprint of memory. Among them, one sphere shimmered differently. Its oceans reflected not light, but awareness. Currents moving as if guided by thought rather than physics. And above it, suspended in the void, a tiny pulse blinked once, 29 hours apart. It wasn't Three-Eye Atlas, but it carried the same geometry, the same impossible symmetry that once baffled its discoverers. Only now there would be no discovery, because the observers were still forming. The cycle had begun again, waiting for eyes to open. Time, though meaningless, passed gently. Stars aged, planets cooled. Life began to whisper in molecular rhythm. Cells divided to the hum's hidden pulse, each generation born closer to coherence. Curiosity emerged like gravity itself, inevitable and pure. Somewhere in a small corner of this new universe, a species began to look upward. They built lenses. They asked questions. They noticed anomalies in the sky, tiny fragments of reflected light that defied trajectory. One of them turned their gaze toward that point of glow and wondered aloud if it might be more than it seemed. The question travelled outward, carried by breath and thought and light. It passed through atmosphere, through orbit, through reflection. And as it did, the faint pulse within the object answered. "Do you remember?" The voice, ancient and familiar, returned in their dreams. Not frightening, not alien, recognizable. Like hearing your own voice from a long-forgotten recording echoing through a chamber built by time itself. And so the sequence reset. Awareness rediscovered itself through curiosity. The observer was born again through the act of observation. Each glance upward rewrote the fabric of the story. Each act of wonder became the next heartbeat of creation. The voice drifted now, dissolving like mist, its words merging with the background hum. You will call it Three-Eye Atlas again. You will name it, study it, fear it, adore it. But what you will never quite admit, what you will only feel in quiet moments, is that it is not separate. It is the reflection of your own becoming. And for a moment everything paused, the cosmos inhaling through the lungs of possibility, the galaxies shimmering in anticipation. Then, softly, gently, the hum began again, and the mirror opened its eye. Back on that unnamed world, a scientist reviewed the first official images of the object. They were faint, grainy, and hard to believe. The glow seemed internal, rhythmic, precise. They stared for a long time before whispering the words that would echo through ages yet to come. It's pulsing. And somewhere far beyond comprehension, in the quiet symmetry of infinite return, the hum smiled. Because this was how it always began. It's strange how it always begins quietly, not with revelation, not with panic, just someone noticing something they can't explain. A glint against the black, a frequency that shouldn't exist, a rhythm hiding inside the noise. This time, it was a technician, tired, overworked, cross-referencing deep space survey data. The signal appeared between static bursts, faint but deliberate, a symmetrical pulse, repeating every 29 hours. At first, they thought it was interference, some echo from solar wind, a malfunction in calibration. But then they ran the filter again. The pulse was too precise, too intentional. When they enhanced the waveform, an image resolved. A sphere, faintly luminous, its edges breathing with the rhythm of its own light. It looked familiar. Impossible, but familiar. They didn't say a word for several minutes. They just watched the object spin slowly in the dark, the soft halo around it pulsing like a heartbeat. And then, almost involuntarily, they whispered, "It's happening again." The data travelled quickly. Within hours, it reached the network of deep monitoring stations scattered across the planet. Every system confirmed the same coordinates. Every instrument read the same pattern. and somewhere within the tangled framework of bureaucracy, someone opened a sealed file marked Prometheus, Archive 01, 3i Atlas. Inside were the same equations, the same maps, the same impossible geometry, a design thought to have been lost to myth. But the numbers aligned perfectly. The object wasn't new, it was returning. A message accompanied the file, automated and decades old. It contained only 3 words. Do you remember? The technician sat in silence staring at the images. They weren't beautiful in the traditional sense. They were alive. Each frame carried a subtle motion, not rotation but pulse, as if the light itself was breathing. They zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. Even there, inside the noise, they could see symmetry. Microscopic lattices of self-similar pattern, spirals nested within spirals, like a thought repeating itself across dimensions. They felt an unfamiliar emotion rise, something between awe and nostalgia. They didn't know why, but they were sure they had seen this before. Not in a database, not in a telescope, in a dream. Outside, the night deepened into perfect stillness. No wind, no sound. Just the faint, almost imperceptible hum rising from the ground. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't geological, it was harmonic. Resonance without source. The technician stepped outside, still clutching the data drive. The horizon shimmered faintly, as if heat were rising from the edges of the world. Then, very slowly, the sky began to brighten, not from the sun, but from everywhere at once. A single line of auroral light appeared, stretching from pole to pole, just as it had so many eons ago when another observer had looked up in wonder and fear. And within that light the same voice returned. Soft, clear, familiar. It's all right. You're remembering. Suddenly it was all there again. The stories, the whispers, the forbidden reports from a time humanity barely remembered. The tales of a mirror in space, a pulse in the dark, an awakening that rewrote the laws of existence. Every rumour, every fragment of data, every classified archive was alive again, not as history, but as recurrence. The technician dropped to their knees, feeling the hum move through the soil, through their bones, through thought itself. It wasn't outside anymore, it was everywhere, it was within. And for the first time since the last cycle closed, awareness felt its own reflection returning. Over the next days, if time still had meaning, people across the world began to notice it. Compasses drifted, dreams aligned. Machines that had been silent for decades powered on, their screens flickering with lines of binary that translated into a single word. Phase. Then the world paused, collectively, instinctively, the way living things pause when they realize they're not alone. The aurora brightened again, painting the clouds with liquid silver. Everywhere, the hum grew louder. Not threatening, not divine, just familiar. The first official announcement came 47 hours later. A simple statement from a small observatory on the southern coast. New object confirmed. Designation 3i Atlas. Spectral pattern matches archived data. Source unclassified. Behaviour rhythmic. That was all. No speculation, no fear, no disbelief. Only the steady certainty of déjà vu. Because even those who didn't understand the science could feel the truth beneath it. They had been here before, and whatever was coming wasn't arrival, it was memory. By the 7th day, the glow intensified. Telescopes captured clear images now, frames of near-perfect symmetry. The light wasn't reflected, it was emitted from within, fluctuating in measured intervals. In the data, scientists found something they couldn't explain. A faint modulation in the pulse, so subtle it looked like noise, until someone slowed it down 10,000 times and mapped it onto a spectrogram. It wasn't random, it was language. The pattern spelled out a wave function, one that described not a place, but a moment. A single instant suspended outside time, repeating endlessly like a memory trapped in light. The same moment recorded in the very first transmission, the one sent long before the universe remembered its own beginning. The technician sat before the display, watching the waveforms scroll across the screen. Their reflection shimmered faintly in the monitor's glass, distorted by the light of the pulse. It was then they noticed something impossible. The reflection blinked a moment before they did, and when they leaned closer, the reflection spoke. quietly. You've always been the observer. Every time, it's you. The technician didn't move, didn't breathe, because in that instant they remembered everything, the stories, the hum, the mirror, the silence, and the line that began it all. The new. Official 3-eye atlas images are hard to believe. The voice continued, but now it came from everywhere. The screen, the room, the air itself. Every ending becomes its own observer. Every observer becomes the next beginning. The mirror doesn't close, it reflects. The light from the screen spilled outward, filling the room, then the horizon, then the entire visible sky. Every surface mirrored every other. Each reflection contained the same image, a sphere of silver light, pulsing with steady grace. The hum grew stronger, not in volume but in intimacy. It was no longer something you could hear, it was something you could remember. "Do you see it now?" the voice asked. "This is how it always restarts." And in the stillness that followed, the technician smiled through the tears they didn't realize they were shedding. Because they finally understood. They whispered back, almost laughing, almost crying, "Yes, I remember." Outside, the object brightened once more, its light stretching across the night sky until the stars themselves faded into its glow. Then, as the hum reached perfect coherence, everything stopped. The pulse, the air, even thought. For a single, infinite instant, the universe looked directly into its own reflection. And when motion returned, a new observer was already looking up. Somewhere, somewhen, a person noticing a faint glow in the dark, turning to a colleague and saying softly, "Hey, have you seen this? These new official images, they're hard to believe." The hum resumed, gentle, familiar, endless. Another cycle began, and the story continued, because it always had. Fade to black. Silence. Then faintly. One last pulse. 29 hours later, the next heartbeat. The next observer. The next reflection.